Welcome back to Autistically Accurate, where I aspirationally aim for autistical accuracy. My Pensieve episode 68. The strong, the weak, and the tactics of power, a realist perspective. In human society, the balance of power has often been framed in stark terms. The strong dominate, and the weak must either adapt or perish. While this view may seem harsh, it resonates with the realist perspective that shapes much of political theory, evolutionary biology, and even social dynamics. The world, in this sense, operates much like an ancient struggle for survival where the strong and adapted secure their dominance, while the weak, whether through strategic alliances, compassion, or manipulation, attempt to subvert the order. But in this contest for power, it is not always the strongest that prevail. Often, the weak do not simply accept their subordinate position. Instead, they turn to insidious tactics, using strategies that might be deemed manipulative, subversive, or even compassionate to weaken or topple their stronger adversaries. This brings us to an uncomfortable reality. Compassion is not always an innocent virtue. At times, it is weaponized, cleverly wielded by the powerless to undermine the powerful. What then does this tell us about power, morality, and the strategies that govern the actions of both the strong and the weak? The survival of the fittest. A Darwinian view of power. At its core, the notion of strength as a means of securing dominance is rooted in a Darwinian understanding of survival. In nature, the strongest and most adaptable organisms succeed, survival of the fittest. Similarly, in human societies, power tends to rest in the hands of those who have the physical, economic, or intellectual might to shape their environment and maintain control. Historically, societies have been governed by those who could dominate through force, resources, or strategy, whether through physical conquest, military superiority, or ideological hegemony. From this perspective, compassion is not merely a moral choice but a tool of the weak. When the powerless cannot directly challenge the powerful through force, they may resort to emotional appeals, alliances, or moral manipulation to undermine their adversaries. Compassion becomes a way to shift the balance of power subtly, to draw in the strong through their own guilt or sense of moral responsibility, weakening their position and allowing the weaker party to gain ground. The underdog strategy, far from being a naive ideal, becomes a tactical maneuver in the fight for dominance, a subversive act of survival. In this context, the compassionate appeals to human rights, immigration, and social justice are not always as altruistic as they may appear. They can serve as a strategic advantage for those who seek to shift the balance of power in their favor. The narrative of the weak seeking justice or the rights of the oppressed often presents the moral high ground, drawing in support, even from those in power who may otherwise be indifferent or opposed. Thus, what may seem like a moral or ethical stance is, in some eyes, a deceptive strategy, cleverly deployed by those seeking to alter the established order. The compassionate prey. Weakness is strength. To some, the tactics of the weak, whether they manifest as appeals to compassion, human rights, or empathy, are viewed as deceptive, insidious, and inherently weak. The strong, in this view, are the true power bearers, and any attempt to subvert their rule through emotional manipulation is seen as an act of trickery. These tactics are perceived as the methods of the prey, seeking to outsmart or weaken the predator through cunning, rather than through strength or direct confrontation. However, this view of compassion as a form of weakness overlooks an important aspect of power dynamics. Power is fluid. The weaker party may be able to exploit the moral conscience or guilt of the strong, forcing them to make concessions or take actions that ultimately harm their own position. History has shown that guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, and subversive strategies can bring even the most powerful empires to their knees. Whether in the form of intellectual resistance, moral arguments, or covert alliances, the weak have often turned the tables on the strong by using tactics that are less about brute force and more about leveraging the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of their adversaries. From a realist perspective, this tactic is not one of virtue but of survival. The strong may scoff at the trickery of the weak, but in the end, survival does not always belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who can adapt and exploit the opportunities before them. If the powerful fail to recognize the moral manipulation as a real threat, they risk being overthrown or undermined, not by physical force, but by a war of ideas or an appeal to emotion that shifts the perception of power. The paradox of compassionate dominance. The tension between compassionate appeals and dominance raises the question: is it truly a virtue to advocate for the weak, or is it a form of strategic weakness that manipulates the powerful into vulnerability? The argument that ethno-nationalism, cultural preservation, or sovereignty are forms of strength, while appeals to migrant rights, social justice, or inclusivity are tools of the weak, points to the paradox at the heart of modern power dynamics. In a world where power is often defined by force, resources, and strategy, it is difficult to accept that moral appeals could be a strategic weapon used to counterbalance the dominant powers. Yet, this is the reality in a complex world shaped not only by military might but by moral narratives, cultural influence, and intellectual subversion. The weaker parties, whether through compassion or cunning, find ways to shift the power balance in their favor, ultimately revealing that moral strength and compassion can be used as tactics of survival, just as much as physical strength. Sport. A controlled environment of power dynamics. One of the most compelling expressions of these dynamics is found in sport. In sport, the strong and the weak engage in battles of strength, strategy, and mental resilience, but without the fatal consequences of real conflict. Unlike war or political struggle, where the stakes can be life or death, sport provides a structured environment where the loser can learn and improve, often returning to challenge the victor again. In this way, sport mirrors real-world power struggles, where the strong face challenges from those who may be considered weaker but have the opportunity to adapt and rise again. The weak or underdogs, despite their perceived disadvantage, can use their adaptability, tactical shifts, and mental fortitude to overturn the power balance. Even in the face of defeat, the loser can learn from their mistakes, recalibrate, and come back stronger in the future. This cycle of competition highlights that victory is not always permanent. The strong are always at risk of being overthrown or outsmarted, and the weak have the chance to use their resilience and strategic insight to regain what they lost. In this way, sport becomes an allegory for the larger power dynamics of human society, where power is constantly in flux, and the true test is not about avoiding defeat but about the ability to learn from it, adapt, and rise again. Conclusion. The pragmatic reality of power. Ultimately, the tension between the strong and the weak, the dominant and the subordinate, is not simply a battle of force or intellect, but one of strategy. The idea that compassion is an inherently weak tactic reflects a particular understanding of power that prioritizes strength and dominance above all else. However, in the complex world of human society, power is not solely derived from physical might, it is a matter of adaptability, moral influence, and strategic manipulation. In this struggle for power, the question is not whether the strong or the weak are morally superior, but rather, who can adapt, who can exploit the other's vulnerabilities, and ultimately, who can survive. Compassion, though often dismissed as weak or manipulative, remains one of the most powerful strategies in the game of power, a tool wielded by both the prey and the predator alike in the struggle for dominance. Whether in politics, war, or sport, the true measure of power lies not only in strength but in the capacity to learn, adapt, and continually reassert one's position in an ever-changing environment. May peace and prosperity be with you. Thank you for watching this presentation. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share my videos and channel to everyone you believe will appreciate such serendipitously informative content.